Noli Tangere. Definition: another name for touch me not. Importance: Noli Tangere or touch me not is not merely an attack on the Spanish colonial regime. It is a character nationalism. It calls on the Filipino to recover his self-confidence, to appreciate his own worth, to return to the heritage of his ancestors, and to assert himself as the equal of the Spaniard. It is not a romantic novel, book of feeling, work of heart, and contains freshness, color, humor, lightness, and wit despite that it depicts the suffering of the Filipino people under the Spanish rule. The Philippines under Spanish rule. The Spanish colonial period of the Philippines began when explorer Ferdinand Magellan came to the islands in 1521 and claimed it as his colony for Spanish Empire. The period lasted until the Philippine Revolution in 1898. The Philippine colony was governed by the Spaniards, by laws made in Spain, and for the sole good of the mother country and its representatives in the colony. Filipinos held only minor offices. They were not given the benefits of the public education, and their rights and wishes were almost completely ignored. Politics in the 19th century. The 19th century saw a significant social change and the development of a distinct Filipino identity among the mestizo elite, members of the educated ilustrado class, influenced by the liberal ideas launched by the propaganda movement.
So now, we go to the themes in the novel Noli Me Tangere. The first theme na ating i-discuss is colonialism. So what is colonialism and how is it portrayed in the novel? Colonialism refers to the practice of one country or group of people extending their power, control, and influence over another country for economic, political, and cultural gain. So basically, ang colonialism is ang paggamit ng isang country ng kanilang power and control in order to win a country. Colonialism is usually yung pag-impose ng mga policies ng language, religion, and other cultural practices sa colonized population. So how is it portrayed in the novel itself? So sa novel, ang colonialism is portrayed as a system of exploitation, oppression, and abuse of power. So dinepict ni Rizal yung Spanish colonial system as a corrupt and oppressive with officials and priests na ginagamit yung mga position nila to enrich their yung colonial government and the expense of Filipino people. And yung pamamaraan ng colonialism is more on the cultural domination. So kaya nga naman natin yung Kristyanismo, yung mga pananalita nila and yung language and pati rin yung mga policies nila. For example is the encomienda system. Another way of depicting colonialism is in the novel is yung concept of colonial mentality. So ang colonial mentality is yung mga colonized people na adapt yung values, attitudes, and practices ng mga colonizers. So sa novel, I think lahat naman ng chapters is, almost all of the chapters is relatable to this concept. Pero yung notable sa akin is, I think it's in chapter 53 or 54 ata ng novel, yung The Espadanya couple. So, yung gist noon is, yung mag-asawang The Espadanya is gusto nilang makipag-affiliate sa mga Spanish friars, which are the higher officials at the time, para ma-gain yung favor and para rin makakuha ng benefits from the Spanish government themselves. Next, we go to social injustice and corruption. In social injustice, the novel portrays oppression experienced by the Filipino people during the Spanish colonial era. One of the most prominent examples is the plight of the peasants or Indios, who are oppressed by the wealthy and powerful Spanish elite. The novel highlights the disparities in wealth and status between the two groups, with the Indios being denied basic rights and freedom. These Indios are depicted as being forced to work long hours for little pay, while the Spanish elite enjoys a life of luxury and excess. So dito makikita na may social divide or social disparity na nangyayari between the wealthy and the poor. So yung poor are considered as the lowest Filipinos, known as Indios, na dinedeny ng basic rights and freedom. And sila rin yung nagsasuffer ng mga harsh policies na ini-impose ng mga Spanish at the time. For example, is yung encomienda system, which is favorable sa mga ruling class na namuno noong Spanish era. In portrayal of corruption naman is yung pag-collaborate ng mga friars and ng officials. So dito is pinapakita na sinusuppress ng mga Spanish at the time yung mga Filipinos' rights, and para ginagamit nila yung political and economic power to enrich themselves at the expense of Filipino people. And they also extort money from the poor and manipulated the justice system to protect their own interests. Next is religious hypocrisy. So, religious hypocrisy naman is how the friars at that time use religion to justify their actions. A good example of this is si Padre Damaso. So, si Padre Damaso is isang righteous and pious man, pero in reality, he's an abusive, greedy, and immoral na tao. He engages in immoral behavior, such as having affairs with women and fathering illegitimate children. So, alam naman natin yung story, I think it's in chapter 56 ng novel, yung parang ni-reveal niya na siya yung legit na tatay ni Maria Clara. And dun pa lang is ma-assume na natin na yung mga ginagawa nila in public is hindi tumbas sa pinipreach nila sa simbahan. And despite sa mga ginagawa nila is na nasa higher position pa rin sila sa church and ina-enjoy yung mga naga-indulge sa riches ng mga tao. So in general, the church is more concerned with its wealth and power than with the spiritual welfare of the people. Yung mga spiritual leaders is shown to be corrupt and oppressive, and they use their positions to enrich themselves and maintain power over the people. And this can also lead to the distortion of religious beliefs and practices. Lastly is education. Education as a tool to fight against social injustices and the colonial oppression of the Spanish government. In the novel, education is portrayed through Ibarra. Ibarra is a young man who returns to the Philippines from Europe to learn more about his roots and to contribute to the betterment of his country. And he sees education as a means of enlightening the people and freeing them from the ignorance and oppression that have long been prevalent in the society. So si Ibarra is nag-advocate siya for a modern education system that promotes critical thinking, creativity, and independence. And naniniwala siya ng education is used to empower the people to promote social change. Pero habang nag-advocate siya is, syempre, mamimit siya ng resistance from the Spanish government themselves. So dito pinapakita na education alone is not enough to bring about the significant change, and more collective efforts ng kada tao sa isang lipunan is needed to overcome the systemic problems in the society. And at the same time is hina-highlight din nito na ang importance ng education in the development of a nation to reform and improve the lives of Filipino people. So in general, education can be used as a powerful tool for social and political change, but it also acknowledges limitations of education in face of systemic oppression and corruption. The novel highlights the need of a more comprehensive approach that involves collective action and advocacy for systemic change. So, that's it. Yun yung end ng ating themes para sa novel ng Noli Tangere.
Well, hello there everyone. I'm MJ. Today, I'm going to talk about some of the symbolisms in the novel Noli Tangere by political activist Jose Rizal. The novel is rich with symbolisms that reflect Rizal's critique of colonialism and his vision for Philippine independence. In this presentation, I will focus on 5 symbols that represent some of the major themes and characters in the novel. To start with, let's go with Padre Damaso and Padre Silvi. Now, these two characters represent the corruption and abuses of the Spanish friars during the colonial period. They are a reflection of the oppressive nature of the Spanish colonial church and its negative impact on the lives of ordinary Filipinos. Their characters remain relevant today as a reminder of the dangers of religious institutions that use their power to oppress and exploit people. Now, both Padre Damaso and Padre Silvi symbolizes the hypocrisy, greed, and tyranny of the Spanish friars who exploited the religious authority to control and manipulate the Filipinos during their era. They also symbolize the resistance and oppression that Ibarra faces in his attempt to reform the society and achieve his happiness. They show how colonialism not only oppressed the Filipinos politically and economically, but also spiritually and morally. Now, the next symbol is the buhaya, or crocodile. This symbol symbolizes the oppressive and exploitative nature of the colonial government, represented by the crocodile that preys on the weak and defenseless. It remains relevant today as a reminder of the dangers of authoritarianism and abuse of power. Now, buhaya is also a metaphor for a person who is greedy or dishonest. In modern times, it is often used to refer to politicians who embezzle public funds or abuse their authority. There is also a phrase, luha ng buhaya, which means crocodile tears or fake sympathy. Now, the next slide, Elias. Now, this character symbolizes the spirit of revolution and a desire for freedom from colonial rule. He represents the struggles and sacrifices of those who fought for Philippine independence and inspired others to continue the struggle for justice and sovereignty. Elias remains relevant today as a reminder of the importance of fighting for freedom and self-determination. Now, Elias is a courageous and noble character who risks his life for his ideals and his country. He is also a visionary who sees bound his own time and hopes for a better future for his people. In the novel, he dies heroically while helping Ibarra escape from prison, but not before entrusting him with his mission to continue the fight for freedom. To the next slide is Sisa. Now, the character symbolizes the suffering and struggles of the Filipino people under colonial rule. Her character is a reflection of the poverty, oppression, and violence that many Filipinos faced during the colonial period. Sisa remains relevant today as a reminder of the importance of addressing social injustice and inequality. In the novel, Sisa is a poor woman living in San Diego, but again, she represents the plight of many Filipinos who were exploited and oppressed by the colonial system. She also represents the loss of identity and dignity that resulted from colonialism. She shows how colonialism not only deprived the Filipinos of their material resources, but also of their mental and emotional well-being. To the last slide is Concilio. This symbolizes the struggle for survival and the need for self-defense against the violence and repression that many Filipinos faced under the colonial rule. The Kutsilyo remains relevant today as a reminder of the importance of self-defense and resistance against oppressive forces. Now, we all know that Kutsilyo is a Tagalog word for knife. In the novel, it represents the desperation and courage of some Filipinos who fought back against their oppressor. It also represents the lack of resources and support that they had in their struggle. The Kutsilyo shows how colonialism forced some of the Filipinos to resort to violence and sacrifice in order to survive and defend themselves. Now, aside from the five symbols that I've discussed, there are also other symbols in Noli that represent some of the themes and characters in the novel. Here are some of them. Tinola, Leeg ng Manok, Teniente Guevara, Kapitan Tiago, Pia Alba, Azotea, Don Rafael Ibarra, Lawa, Punyal, Basilio at Crispin, and others. Now, in conclusion, Noli is a novel that uses various symbols to convey its message and critique of colonialism and its effect on the Philippines. The symbols reflect the themes and characters of the novel, as well as the historical and social context of the time. The symbols also remain relevant today, as they remind us of the importance of fighting for freedom, justice, and dignity for our nation and our people. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Once again, I'm MJ.
Good day. I'm Rainier Hingco. I'm about to present the reception and the impact of Noli. First is the controversy surrounding the publication of Noli. The novel's publication sparked controversy and led to its ban in the Philippines by the Spanish colonial authorities. There were several reasons why the book was controversial. First is criticism of the Spanish colonial government. The novel is critical of the Spanish colonial government and its policies in the Philippines. It exposes the corruption and abuses of the Spanish officials and their exploitation of the Filipino people. The novel exposes the corruption and abuses of the Spanish officials who hold positions of power in the Philippines. It highlights the exploitation of the Filipino people who were treated as second-class citizens in their own country. The novel portrays the Spanish government as oppressive, cruel, and indifferent to the needs and aspiration of the Filipinos. The book also criticized the role of the Catholic Church in the Philippines, which was closely intertwined with the Spanish colonial government. It highlighted the abuses of the friars, who held great power and influence over the local population. The novel challenged the legitimacy of the Spanish colonial government and called for reform and change. Second, religious themes. The novel also has religious themes, and it critiques the role of the Catholic Church in the Philippines. Razo portrays the church as corrupt and oppressive, with priests using their power to exploit and control the people. As discussed in the criticism of Spanish colonial government, Razo portrays the church as corrupt and oppressive, with priests using their power to exploit and control the people. The novel highlights the abuses of the friars who hold great power and influence over the local population. These abuses included forced labor, extortion, and sexual exploitation. The novel also criticizes the Spanish government for supporting the church and allowing it to have such a significant role in the Philippines. Noli calls for a more just and humane society that values the dignity and freedom of all people. Controversy on Rizal's homecoming. After the publication of his novel Noli, a storm broke out over Jose Rizal, who was then living in Europe. He received a letter from the Gobernador General of the Philippines, Emilio Terrero, ordering him to return to the Philippines for questioning. In response to the Gobernador General order, Rizal decided to go to Manila and appear before him. It was a brave decision, as he was fully aware of the risk and danger he faced by returning to the Philippines. where he was likely to be arrested and persecuted for his political beliefs and criticism of the government and the church. Rizal arrived in Manila in June 1887, a few weeks after receiving the Governor General letter. He was immediately interrogated and questioned about the contents of his novel, which was considered a subversive and seditious work that undermined the authority of the Spanish colonial government and the Catholic Church. Despite the pressure and intimidation he faced, Rizal stood firm in his belief and defended the ideas and principles he had expressed in his novel. He argued that his work was not meant to incite rebellions or violence, but to expose the injustice and abuses that existed in Philippine society under Spanish colonial rule. In the end, Rizal was allowed to leave Manila and return to Europe. However, his return to the Philippines and his subsequent confrontation with the authorities marked a turning point in his life, and his commitment to the struggle for the Philippines' independence and the right of the Filipino people. To protect Rizal from potential harm, a king governor assigned a bodyguard to him. This bodyguard was a young Spanish lieutenant named Don Jose Taviel de Andrade. Taviel de Andrade was tasked with ensuring Rizal's safety and security while he was in the Philippines. The assignment of the bodyguard to Rizal highlights the danger and risk he faced as a political activist and intellectual in the Philippines during the late 19th century. It also demonstrates the courage and commitment of those who were willing to stand with him and support him in his struggle for freedom and justice. We now go to Rizal's enemies. The attackers of the Noli included primarily the Catholic clergy, namely Pedro Payo, the Archbishop of Manila, who ordered the investigation and recommendation of the said novel. Father Gregorio Echeverria, director of the University of Santo Tomas that time, who ordered to study the novel at the UST. Fray Salvador, the front head of the Permanent Commission of Censorship, filed a report to the government that the Noli, being injurious to the interests of the colonial government and the Catholic clergy, must be immediately banned. Father Jose Rodriguez, who published as a reaction to the Noli Me Tangere, a pamphlet entitled Kaingat Kayo. The said pamphlet stated that whoever reads the Noli shall commit a moral sin. Based on their assessment, the novel contained subversive ideas against the church and state, and recommended its banning and circulation in the island. The novel was also firstly attacked in the session hall of the Senate of the Spanish Cortes. The senators, namely General Jose de Salamanca, General Luis de Pando, Senor Fernando Vida, and a bonus that is a Spanish writer, Vicente Barrantes, who openly criticized the novel in the Spanish newspaper La Hispana Moderna. Rizal allies. Though the enemy may be enormous, the defenders were also busy spreading their cause. Propagandists such as Marcelo H. del Pilar, Cristiano Lopez Jaina, Antonio Maria Regidor, and Mariano Ponce rushed to uphold the truths of the Noli. Marcelo H. del Pilar, pen name Dolores Manapat, published a pamphlet entitled Kaingat Kayo as an answer to Father Rodriguez' Kaingat Kayo. Father Francisco Sanchez also went public to defend the novel. Don Sigismundo Moret, former Minister of the Crown, Professor Miguel Moraita, historian and statesman, Professor Ferdinand Blumentritt, Rizal's best friend, Reverend Father Vicente Garcia, a Filipino Catholic priest scholar, a theologian of the Manila Cathedral, and a Tagalog translator of the famous Imitation of Christ by Thomas Kempis. Under the pen name Justo Desiderio Magalang, he wrote a defense of the novel published in Singapore. We now go to Noli Me Tangere as a catalyst for revolution. Noli Me Tangere played a significant role in inspiring the Philippine Revolution and contributing to the country's eventual independence from Spanish rule. Here are some ways in which the novel acted as a catalyst for revolution. Exposed the injustice of Spanish colonial rule. Noli Me Tangere is widely regarded as a landmark work of the Philippine literature because it exposed the injustice of Spanish colonial rule in the Philippines. Through its portrayal of the characters and events, the novel highlights the abuses and corruption of the Spanish colonial government and the Catholic Church, which were the two dominant forces in the Philippines during the late 19th century. The novel highlights the suffering of the Filipino people under Spanish colonial rule, depicting the social injustice and economic exploitation that were pervasive at that time. The novel also showed how the colonial government and the church used their power to maintain their control over the people with little regard for their welfare. The publication of Noli Me Tangere was a turning point in Philippine history, as it sparked a growing sense of nationalism and resistance among Filipinos. It exposed the harsh realities of colonial rule and encouraged Filipinos to question their status as subjects of Spain and to demand greater rights and freedom. As a result, the novel played a significant role in the Philippine Revolution, which eventually led to the country's independence from Spain in 1898. It remains a powerful symbol of the Philippine nationalism and resistance, and a testament to the courage and determination of those who fought for their freedom and dignity. Next is, inspired the formation of the Katipunan. The novel inspired the formation of the Katipunan, a revolutionary organization that aimed to overthrow Spain's colonial rule in the Philippines. The founder of the Katipunan, Andres Bonifacio, was inspired by the ideas and themes in the Noli Me. Noli Me Tangere had a profound impact on the Philippines and inspired many people to take action against the injustice of Spanish colonial rule. One of the most significant results of this was the formation of the Katipunan. The influence of Noli Me Tangere on the formation of the Katipunan cannot be overstated. The novel played a significant role in inspiring the revolutionary movement that eventually led to the overthrow of Spanish colonial rule in the Philippines. It remains a powerful symbol of the struggle for freedom and independence in the Philippines, and a testament to the power of literature to inspire and motivate people to action. Galvanize the Filipino people. Noli Me had a significant impact on the Filipino people, galvanizing them to take action against Spanish colonial rule. The novel depicted the injustice and abuses of the colonial government and the Catholic Church. Through its powerful storytelling, Noli Me Tangere helped create a sense of national identity and pride among Filipinos. It encouraged them to embrace their heritage and to resist the forces that sought to subjugate and control them. The novel inspired many Filipinos to take action against Spanish colonial rule and played a crucial role in the Philippine Revolution that eventually led to the country's independence from Spain. Noli Me Tangere was a rallying cry for the oppressed and disenfranchised, and it helped to galvanize the Filipino people in their struggle for freedom and independence. Contributed to the development of a Filipino national consciousness. The novel's depiction of the struggle and aspiration of the Filipino people helped to foster a sense of unity and solidarity among them. It encouraged Filipinos to see themselves as part of a larger community with a shared history and culture, and to work towards a common vision for the future. Noli Me Tangere played a crucial role in the development of a Filipino national consciousness. It helped to create a sense of shared identity and purpose among Filipinos and encouraged them to work together towards a better future for themselves and their country. In conclusion, Noli Me Tangere played a significant role in inspiring the Philippine Revolution and contributing to the country's injustice of Spanish colonial rule. Inspired the formation of the Katipunan, galvanized the Filipino people, contributed to the development of Filipino national consciousness, and inspired other nationalist movements The novel continues to be an important part of the Philippine literature and a symbol of Filipino identity and resistance against colonialism.
Here are some adaptations of Noli Me Tangere in film and theater by many talented people who managed to capture the essence of the novel in their own creative ways. In 1915, we had a silent film adaptation by Edward M. Gross. In 1951, Sisa, a motion picture directed by Gerardo de Leon starring Anita Linda. In 1957, an opera in Filipino composed by Felipe de Leon with libretto by Guillermo Tolentino. Libretto is the text of an opera or other long vocal work. In 1961, a film adaptation was directed by Gerardo de Leon for Bayanihan Arriba Productions. It also won the Best Picture in the 10th FAMAS Award. The Filipino Academy of Movie, Arts, and Sciences Award is one of the highly distinguished film award bodies in the country. In 1979, Cancer, a Filipino play written by Jomar Fleras. It premiered at the Cultural Center of the Philippines by theater group Bulwagang Cantimpala, now known as Cantimpala Theater. It has been staged annually since 1989. In 2015, it was adopted into a sung-through musical with music composed by Joed Balsamo. In 1993, a 13-episode miniseries by Eddie S. Romero, which premiered on ABC on July 6. In 1995, a Filipino musical adaptation was staged by theater company Tanghalang Pilipino, with libretto by Bienvenido Lumbera and music by Ryan Cayabyab. It premiered at the Cultural Center of the Philippines, directed by Nonon Padilla. It went on tour in Japan. It was restaged in 2005 by Paul Morales and in 2011 by Adi Gamora. In 2014, it was staged in Los Angeles by Olga Natividad. In 1998, Sisa, a remake of the 1961 film of the same name, written and directed by Mario O'Hara. From 2008 to 2009, Noli at Fili, Decada 2000, a staged adaptation of Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo by the Philippine Educational Theater Association, set in the present day in a fictional town of Maipao in the province of San Lorenzo, written by Nicanor G. Tiongson and directed by Soxy Topakyo. In 2019, Damaso, a musical film. And the most recent adaptation is Maria Clara at Ibarra, a TV drama broadcast on GMA Network inspired by the Tu Rizal novel. And the most recent adaptation is Maria Clara at Ibarra, a TV drama broadcast on GMA Network inspired by the two Rizal novels. Here is a clip from the show.
This October,
Dadaling ka ng librong ito sa mundo na ikinatha ni Jose Rizal.
GMA is taking us back to the past. Kasama ang isang Gen Z.
Talaga bang nasa Noli Me Tangere ako?
Starring Barbie Forteza,
Wala pa bang bra sa panahon to?
Julianne San Jose,
Kamangha-mangha. Saan niya kaya ito nakuha?
and Dennis Trillo.
Sino ka ba talaga, Benny? At bakit mo ako sinusundan?
Sa seryeng magbibigay ng bagong pagpapahalaga sa ating nakaraan
Nagkakaloob na sila ng titulo o degree para sa mga kababaihan?
at sa ating kasalukuyan.
Grabe naman kayo makapang-insulto ng mga babae. Everyone has that basic human right to education.
Maria Clara at Ibarra.
Kailangan akong madala ng pobreng babae ngayon sa ospital psikiatriko upang magamot ng dalubhasang doktor ang kanyang pag-iisip.
Tataliin ako sa mental.
World premiere October 3 sa GMA.
It features Clay Infantes being transported into the novel's world. This leads us to the continuing relevance and influence of Noli Me Tangere. Noli Me Tangere continues to be relevant today because it tackles themes and issues that are still present in Philippine society. Its relevance can also be seen in various adaptations of the novel
and is a common references in Philippine literature and culture. One of the main themes of the novel is social injustice, which is still prevalent in the country. It exposes the corruption and abuse of power among the ruling elite, which has continued to be a problem in the Philippine politics. The issues of poverty, lack of education, and inequality also persist in modern-day Philippines. Moreover, the novel also highlights the struggle for national identity and cultural preservation. The novel depicts the oppression of Filipino culture and language under colonial rule, which has parallels to the current struggle for the recognition and preservation of Filipino culture and heritage. The characters in the novel also serve as archetypes for various social issues. For instance, Maria Clara represents the limitations imposed on women during the Spanish colonial period, and her character continues to be relevant today in the fight for women's rights and gender equality.
Here are several examples of certain issues raised in Noli Me Tangere na hanggang ngayon ay nangyayari pa sa contemporary Philippine society. First is social injustice. Despite economic growth, yung kahirapan at income inequality patuloy na issue dito sa Pilipinas. Yung gap between rich and poor remains wide, and yung access sa mga basic services kagaya ng education and healthcare ay nananatiling limitado sa karamihan ng mga Filipino. Ikalawa naman ay political corruption. Corruption remains a pervasive problem in Philippine politics, with many high-ranking officials implicated in graft and corruption scandals. Just by looking at the news or just by simply observing, halata naman siguro ang ganitong kaso saan man na banda sa Pinas. And this has eroded public trust in government institutions and hindered the country's development. Third is cultural preservation. The dominance of Western culture and the neglect of Philippine heritage and tradition is still a concern for many Filipinos. Dahil sa paggamit ng English sa edukasyon at media, nakakadagdag ito sa pagliit ng gamit ng wikang Filipino at sa pagkawala ng ating pagkakakilanlan sa kultura. Last is women's rights and gender equality. Gender-based violence and discrimination against women persist in Philippine society. Women are still underrepresented in politics and leadership positions, and they face challenges in accessing education and employment opportunities. Even now, nakakaranas pa rin ang maraming kababaihan nito. Kesyo, mas magaling o matalino daw ang mga lalaki. Dumapo naman tayo sa importance of preserving and studying Noli Me Tangere. Preserving and studying Noli Me Tangere is crucial for several reasons. Firstly, it is a significant piece of Philippine literature that reflects the country's colonial history and the struggles of the Filipino people during that period. Yung novel na to, nag-o-offer ng insight into the social and political conditions of the Philippines under Spanish colonial rule, and nag-provide siya ng perspective sa nation's identity and culture. Secondly, studying Noli Me Tangere can help foster a sense of national consciousness and pride among Filipinos. Itong novel, nag-serve siya as a reminder sa mga sacrifices na ginawa ng ating country's heroes sa pag-fight ng independence and sovereignty. Hina-highlight din ito yung importance ng education, critical thinking, and civic engagement sa pag-shape ng future ng ating nation. Thirdly, Noli Me Tangere has had a profound impact on Philippine literature and culture. Na-inspire niya yung other writers and artists na gumawa ng works na nag-explore ng parehas na themes and issues. Moreover, yung novel na to, it has been adapted into various media, such as films, plays, and musicals which continue to reach a wide audience and influence in Philippine popular culture. Sa pag-preserve and pag-aral ng Noli Me Tangere, we not only honor the legacy of Jose Rizal, but also deepen our understanding of Philippine history and culture. We learn from the lessons of the past and gain insights into the challenges facing the nation today. As college students, we are constantly seeking knowledge and understanding of the world around us. One way to expand our horizons is by reading literature, and there is no better place to start than with the works of Jose Rizal.
Next up, conclusion. Conclusion for all of the topics that have been discussed in historical perspective in Noli Me Tangere. First is importance. The novel is considered to be one of the most important works of Philippine literature and has been a major influence in the social, political, and cultural development of the country. It is written as the social commentary on Spanish colonization of the Philippines. The novel focuses on Filipino society during the late 19th century and the struggles of the characters for freedom and justice. It is a powerful and important work that speaks to issues of oppression, inequality, and social justice and serves as a reminder of the importance of standing up for what is right. So, importante yung nadulot ng Noli Me Tangere. Ito yung bumuo sa bansa natin at nagtulong para makamit natin yung kalayaan. Isipin nyo kung wala ang Noli Me Tangere, siguro mas naging matagal pa yung pagiging sunod-sunuran nating mga Pilipino sa mga Espanyol na parang aso. Next conclusion is Philippines under Spanish rule. During the Spanish colonial period in the Philippines, which lasted from 1565 to 1898, Filipinos were largely excluded from positions of power and influence in the colonial government. While some Filipinos were able to hold minor offices, the highest positions were reserved for Spaniards or those of Spanish descent. Additionally, Filipinos were not afforded the benefits of public education and were instead limited to religious education provided by the Catholic Church. So, as a result, the vast majority of Filipinos remain illiterate and lack access sa mga oportunidad at resources na makakatulong sa kanila para mapabuti ang kanilang kalagayan sa buhay. Kadalasan, ang kanilang mga karapatan at hangarin ay hindi pinapansin ng mga Kastilang kolonyal na otoridad, na nagdudulot ng malawakang di pagkakasundo at pag-aalsa laban sa pamumuno ng mga Kastila. Ang kontekstong ito ay narefleksyon sa mga tema ng nobelang Noli Me Tangere ni Jose Rizal, na nagbibigay diin sa mga social injustice at political oppression na naranasan ng mga Pilipino sa ilalim ng kolonyalismong Kastila. Next conclusion is the politics in the 19th century. Politics in the 19th century was characterized by significant social and political changes. The period saw the rise of nationalism and the development of distinct identities among various groups. In the Philippines, the mestizo elite who had previously identified with the Spanish colonizers began to develop a sense of Filipino identity, fueled by the publication of Noli Me Tangere by Jose Rizal. So, ang politika sa ika-19 na siglo ay nagmarka ng mga malaking pagbabago sa lipunan at pag-unlad ng mga kakaibang pagkakakilanlan ng mga Pilipino. Ang nakapag-aral na ilustrado class na naimpluwensyahan ng mga liberal na ideya ay nagsimula ng propaganda movement ng Noli Tangere. Ang kilusang ito ay naglalayong ipakita ang mga kawalang katarungan ng kolonyal na napagmamahala ng mga Kastila at humiling ng reforma sa pamahalaan at lipunan. Ang kilusang ito ay nakatulong sa paghubog ng pagkakakilanlan ng mga Pilipino at nagbukas ng daan para sa himagsikang Pilipino sa dulo ng 80s. For next conclusion is colonialism. It exposed the iniquities of Spanish colonial rule in the Philippines. Rizal depicts a society in which the wealthy and powerful Spanish elite oppress and exploit the poor and indigenous Filipino population. Through the character of Ibarra and his experiences, Rizal reveals the injustices of colonial system in the Philippines. The novel sparked a revolution, leading to the eventual independence of the Philippines from Spanish rule. So, overall dito, tig-elaborate ng novel kung gaano yung Spanish colonial government ka-oppressive, corrupt, and hypocritical. Next conclusion is social injustice and corruption. Noli Tangere depicts the social injustices and corruption that existed in the Philippine society during the Spanish colonial period. The wealthy Spanish and mestizo families held most of the power and wealth, while the poor were forced to work in harsh conditions for little pay. The novel exposes the harsh living conditions of Filipino people under Spanish colonial rule, including the abuse of power by the authorities and discrimination against native Filipinos. Corruption is also highlighted in the novel, particularly in the context of Spanish colonial administration, where officials engage in bribery, extortion, and abuse of power. So overall, the novel portrays how the colonial system perpetuated inequality and social stratification, and how those in authority used their positions of power to enrich themselves at the expense of the poor and marginalized. Next conclusion is symbolism. Noli Tangere is not just a novel, but it is also a symbol of the Filipino people's struggle for freedom and independence. The novel was written during the Spanish colonial period in the Philippines, and it is a scathing critique of the Spanish colonial government and the abuses of the Spanish priors. The novel is a powerful symbol of the Filipino people's resistance to colonialism and their desire for self-determination. It is also a symbol of the power of literature to inspire social change and to give voice to the oppressed. Jose Rizal, the author of the novel, was a revolutionary who believed in the power of education and literature to bring about social change. His novel, Noli Tangere, is a testament to his belief in the power of literature to inspire and to transform. So, ang Noli Tangere daw ay isang nobela na mayaman sa simbolismo na nakakatulong sa atin na maunawaan ang konteksto ng kasaysayan ng panahon ng Kastilang kolonyalismo sa Pilipinas at ang mga pakikibaka ng mga Pilipino sa panahong ito. Ang nobela ay isang malakas na simbolo ng paglaban ng mga Pilipino sa kolonyalismo at ang kanilang pagnanais para sa kalayaan at sariling pagpapasya sa pamamagitan ng paggamit ng literatura, hinangad ng may akda na si Jose Rizal na magbigay ng inspirasyon para sa pagbabago sa lipunan at bigyan ng tinig ang mga naapi. Kaya't ang Noli Me Tangere ay hindi lamang isang gawang peksyon, kundi isang simbolo ng pagpakikibaka ng mga Pilipino para sa kalayaan at ang kanilang matatag na diwa upang labanan ang pagmamalupit.